should be responsible for this? Both the assault, which of course police have already arrested several suspects, but also the result that women was assaulted while there are many others on the site watching. Ms. Lu.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the hotel does have certain obligation of duty of care, and they also should provide the security there. Of course, there are also people watching there, but to what extent they should be responsible? We don't really have a compulsory law that they should take action.
Dr. Morris, you know, there's discussions about whether women should, quote unquote, protect themselves in public places to the extent that they can. Secondly, of course, whether the hotel should be providing the right service of security and safety for women and men alike, and should women asking for extra, quote unquote, safety protection. And third, of course, whether the laws are relevant and sufficient in protecting women's safety. And thirdly, whether the bystander, as Ms. Wang here in Beijing mentioned, should be coming up and try to help the women in which in the incident in which she was being attacked. So all of these arguments all at the same time. Sometimes, Dr. Morris, when you have so many arguments in so many directions, we sometimes become blurred about what is the most important part of it. From your judgment, what is the most important part that we should really follow and really look into details?
Thank you so much for inviting me to be in this discussion, because it's a really important discussion. This was a horrific incident. What I want to have us realize is that it's not an isolated incident. Around the world, 1 in 3 women in their lifetimes will either be raped, beaten, or abused in their lifetimes. So, you know, this is an important issue that requires significant, a significant and a robust response. And there are 3 elements of response that we need to look at. We need to look at the kinds of things that we need to do in terms of prevention. We need to do look at the kinds of things we need to do in terms of protection. And then we also need to look at the kinds of things we need to do in terms of prosecution. I mean, this is a very complex issue, and it requires a very robust response in all 3 areas.
Of course, we are already talking about the prosecution because the police got involved, but as to what extent that would eventually come out, it is still a legal process. We have to wait for the result. But what about the first and the second part, which Dr. Morris mentioned, which is prevention and protection? Ms. Lu, you're a lawyer here in China. And of course, you also served your European counterparts as well. So know pretty much both worlds. Help us to understand, are there relevant parts within China's law protecting women under certain circumstances and also prevent such cases from happening?
Well, we have general like criminal law, we have some general rules and regulations. We also have some general policies about protecting women and the children's rights. But in terms of our case really related to this kind of case, I'm afraid the special protection for women is really weak, right?
What do you mean by special protection?
Like
and
you
should women ask for, quote unquote, special protection?
Well, I think, of course, if you look at men and women's rights, they should have the same right. But it's true that women are very easy to be target of being attacked. For example, going to the hotel, going for the taxi, walking the street in the late evening. So I think there really should be some special protection for that. And if you look at our situation around the world, for example, in Europe, there are some hotels where they actually have a single ladies floor, which means the single lady, they move into the hotel, they can go to that special floor, and they have more enhanced security, and women feel much safer there. It's not just a protection from a commercial perspective, it's also very good for the hotel.
But can you expect the Chinese hotel to be as caring as, let's just say, the European hotels, in which probably they have been using this practice for quite some time? But can the Chinese one really up to that standard? Ms. Lu, you have better judgment than I do.
I think some of them should, right? I think first of all, we do have law which require the hotel, they must provide security and a safe environment for their guests. I think secondly, you have so many hotels in China, they're trying to get the customers and they're trying to all say that we're special, but safety is the basic issue, right? It's really very critical and they should really use that.
Dr. Morris, I understand your organization, Women Thrive Worldwide, also provides certain kinds of services in other developing countries, for example, in India, in which there were a lot of cases broke out regarding the taxis, safety for women, and etc. So what do you make of what Ms. Lu just argued? What kinds of basic ground legal work and social work needs to be done here?
Yeah, there's a number of work, that is on the way and that needs to be done, and that I think communities in China can benefit from and learn from. On the prevention side, there's lots of work that's being done by civil society organizations in terms of raising the awareness within communities about the problem of violence against women and the kinds of attitudes that we have about that and why it's important for individuals and communities to speak up and speak out. I'll give a couple of examples. In Jordan, for instance, one of our partners called She Fighter does a lot of work to sort of train women in self-defense so that they can be able to protect themselves, physically, as well as dealing with some of the social and psychological impacts of violence against women. The Rwanda Women's Network, for instance, has done, lots of posters that show a man attacking a woman and another community member, intervening, and they have dialogues within communities to talk about what this means and what people's roles and responsibilities are in ending violence. So there are things like that that are being done to really sort of, work on the prevention side to reduce the number of incidents that we have, and also on the protection side. I do agree with the other guests that it is incumbent on hotels to provide security for all its guests, including female guests. And one has to ask questions about how this man was able to get into the hotel in the first place. What are the security procedures, for getting in? One has to ask questions also about, what's the kind of training that's being given to staff, so that if a staff sees an incident, shouldn't that staff at the very least call security right away? So I think there are lots of questions that are out there, but there are also lots of practices and procedures that can be adapted, from other, practices around the world that can be adapted for China. Yes.
Dr. Wang, you heard what Dr. Morris just said. This case is important. It's not because it's about the safety of one individual woman or this story become viral. It is important because it really raised an alert about exactly how women's rights are being protected, how safety of customers are being protected also in hotels and many other different locations. So Dr. Wang, shed some light on that for us. We have learned women holding half the sky in China back from the Mao days, 1950s. But how much really is that a slogan? How much the slogan has been really implemented into the all fibers of the society? That's a big question.
Yeah. I think I noticed that after the incident, a lot of discussion on how to train the women to have the skill of self-defense. I feel a little bit,
off the target.
Off the targeting. Yeah, it's kind of like asking the women take all the responsibility of their own safety. I think that's not fair. Instead of ask that question, we should ask why those men would think they have the privilege to do such thing. How in the society we should take some, actions to prevent this kind of things.
And one of the interesting thing about this, Dr. Wang, is that you heard this huge outcry from the social media this time. Once the women who were assaulted apparently broke the story on social media, enormous attention on this case. A lot of women spoke out, and also men as
Yeah.
well, our partners
Yeah.
spoke out. But should this be the way?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
one is assaulted, one has to go to social media to call for help, and eventually everybody pay attention to this specific case, and therefore this specific case can be handled and being put into a legal process. Should that be so-called a case model for every such incident, or actually there should be the right ways to handle it from the very beginning?
Yes, I think a good way after this incident, the social media make a sensational response from the general public. On the good side, we can say now the general public really pay attention to women's safety and the issues of violence against women. But at the other side, I feel very sad about this story. The women in the powerless position, they have to use the social media as the last weapon to fight for the justice.
What does it say about our society? How would the law and legal system be complete so that these kind of things and questions will not become questions in the future?
Absolutely, thank you so much. I do want to agree with Dr. Wang. I mean, I think that these issues is everyone's business, right? And part of what has happened is that very often, when people see, public violence like this, they see it as, something that's within a family. They assume that that's what it is, and they feel that it's not their business to step in. But, violence is, everyone's business, and it's the kind of thing that we want to end. And being able to grow that counter narrative and make it the norm is a really important enterprise for all of us to be engaged in. In terms of, how we then sort of deal with these issues, with survivors, I think it's really important for us to look at, and make sure that the security system and the legal system is survivor focused, that it really addresses and doesn't re-victimize them as they go through the process,